What if the most powerful anti aging laboratory in human history was not a pharmaceutical research facility, not a Silicon Valley longevity startup, not a Swiss clinic charging six figures for experimental protocols, but a simple garden? Specifically, the herb gardens, wild hillsides, and ancient trade routes of civilizations that have been gone for thousands of years. Here is something that almost nobody in the modern longevity conversation is talking about. The herbs that ancient physicians prescribed for vitality, clarity, and long life are not lost. They are not rare. Several of them are growing in your backyard right now, and researchers who have spent careers studying the biology of aging keep arriving at the same jaw dropping conclusion. These plants were targeting the exact mechanisms of cellular aging that modern geroscience has only recently learned to identify. Today, we are going through 10 of them. 10 herbs with documented ancient use for longevity and vitality, each one now backed by clinical and laboratory research, confirming what healers observed thousands of years ago without a single electron microscope. Stay with me because number 5 on this list was so trusted in one of the oldest continuous medical traditions on Earth that it was prescribed specifically to restore what aging takes from the brain. And the compound responsible for that effect has now been identified and replicated in controlled trials. And number 2 was carried along the ancient Silk Road not as a spice, not as a flavoring, but as a medicine so valued it was worth more per weight than gold in certain markets. Once you understand what it does to cellular aging at the mitochondrial level, you will completely understand why. Let us start the countdown. Number 10, rosemary. The herb that ancient scholars wore on their heads when it mattered most. There is a detail from ancient Greece that most people encounter and then immediately forget. Students preparing for examinations, orators before significant speeches, scholars engaged in demanding mental work wore garlands of rosemary. Not laurel, not olive, rosemary. This was not an aesthetic choice. These were practical people solving practical problems, and they had observed across generations that rosemary did something to mental performance that no other plant reliably replicated. The active compound responsible is called 1,8-cineol, a volatile terpene found in high concentrations in rosemary essential oil. And here is where the ancient observation becomes modern science. Researchers at Northumbria University found that simply being in a room diffused with rosemary aroma produced measurable improvements in speed and accuracy on cognitive tasks. The mechanism is pharmacologically specific. 1,8-cineol crosses the blood-brain barrier and inhibits acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, one of the primary neurotransmitters governing memory and learning. This is the same enzymatic pathway targeted by pharmaceutical drugs developed for early-stage cognitive decline. The ancient scholars were not wearing rosemary because it smelled pleasant. They were wearing it because generations of careful observation had taught them that it kept the mind sharper under pressure. Beyond cognition, rosmarinic acid, one of rosemary's primary polyphenols, has been studied extensively for its capacity to neutralize the free radical accumulation that drives oxidative aging in cells. It has demonstrated protective effects on vascular tissue and measurable anti-inflammatory activity that positions it squarely in the conversation about longevity-relevant compounds. Traditional preparation was direct and intuitive. Fresh sprigs added to hot water for a morning infusion. The oil pressed and rubbed into the temples before demanding work. Incorporated into food at every meal, not as decoration, but as daily maintenance. Yet rosemary is sitting in spice racks across the world right now, being used exclusively to flavor roasted potatoes. The Greek scholars would not have understood that choice. Number 9, sage, the plant whose Latin name is a direct statement about what it does. Salvia officinalis. Salvia comes from the Latin salvare, meaning to save or to heal. The officinalis designation means it was an official medicine of the apothecary, recognized by formal medical institutions as a genuine therapeutic plant. When the Romans named a plant that way, they were not being poetic. They were recording a clinical consensus built from centuries of observed outcomes. Sage was used throughout the ancient Mediterranean and across Arabic medical traditions, specifically for two things that are now recognized as central targets of anti aging research: cognitive preservation and hormonal stabilization. The compounds responsible include rosmarinic acid shared with rosemary, carnosic acid, and a specific volatile oil profile that has demonstrated cholinesterase inhibiting activity in published laboratory studies. A 2003 study published in Pharmacology, Biochemistry, and Behavior found that sage extract produced significant improvements in memory and attention in healthy young adults within hours of a single dose. Subsequent trials confirmed benefits in older adults and in populations showing early cognitive decline. This is a plant that ancient physicians prescribed for preserving the mind as age advanced. And it is producing measurable results on the exact cognitive markers that decline first in the aging brain. The carnosic acid in sage also activates a cellular pathway called NRF2, a master regulator that switches on the body's internal antioxidant defenses. This is not a minor footnote. NRF2 activation is one of the most actively studied mechanisms in longevity science right now, precisely because it does not add antioxidants from outside the cell. It instructs the cell to produce its own defenses more efficiently. Sage was teaching cells to protect themselves before anyone had a word for NRF2. Traditional use included sage tea taken regularly for mental clarity and memory support. Fresh leaves chewed directly for throat and gum health, and preparations applied topically for wound healing and skin inflammation. The Romans named it correctly. The plant saves. Number 8, holy basil, the adaptogen that 3,000 years of Ayurvedic medicine refused to stop using. Most people in the Western world know basil as the herb that goes on pizza and into pesto. In the Ayurvedic medical tradition that has been practiced continuously for over 3,000 years, a specific variety called Oxymum tenuiflorum or Tulsi occupies an entirely different category. It was not a culinary herb. It was classified as an adaptogen, a plant that helps the body resist the physiological effects of stress, and it was prescribed for virtually every condition associated with premature aging: chronic fatigue, hormonal disruption, immune weakness, cognitive decline, and inflammatory disease. Modern research has now investigated the specific mechanisms behind that classification and found them pharmacologically defensible across multiple independent studies. Holy basil contains a complex of active compounds including eugenol, rosmarinic acid, ursolic acid, and ocimumosides that work across several aging pathways simultaneously. Ursolic acid has been studied for its ability to inhibit atrophy of skeletal muscle, one of the most consequential and least discussed aspects of biological aging. Muscle loss with age is not cosmetic. It is directly associated with metabolic decline, immune dysregulation, and reduced resilience across every organ system. Research has found that ursolic acid increases muscle mass and strength in animal models by activating insulin-like growth factor signaling, an effect significant enough to attract the attention of researchers studying sarcopenia, the clinical term for age-related muscle loss. The adaptogenic classification is supported by trials showing that holy basil extract measurably reduces cortisol, the primary stress hormone whose chronic elevation is now recognized as one of the most reliable drivers of accelerated aging. High cortisol over time damages the hippocampus, disrupts immune regulation, elevates blood sugar, and accelerates cellular senescence. Holy basil appears to interrupt that cascade. Traditional use was daily and non-negotiable in households that took it seriously. The fresh leaves taken in the morning as a tea or chewed directly. The plant grown in the home as both a practical medicine and a living presence. 3,000 years of continuous use in one of the most sophisticated medical traditions ever developed is not a coincidence. It is a data set. Number 7, ashwagandha, the root that ancient physicians prescribed when the body itself was running out of time. Withania somnifera has been a central herb in Ayurvedic medicine for over 4,000 years. Its name in Sanskrit translates roughly to the strength of a horse, and it was prescribed specifically for what ancient physicians recognized as conditions of depletion: the exhaustion that follows prolonged illness, the weakness that comes with advancing age, the loss of vitality that happens when the body's reserves have been chronically drawn down without adequate restoration. That characterization maps almost exactly onto what modern geroscience is now identifying as the hormonal and cellular profile of biological aging. The primary active compounds in ashwagandha are withanolides, steroidal lactones with a structure that allows them to interact with multiple hormonal and inflammatory pathways simultaneously. Randomized controlled trials have demonstrated that ashwagandha supplementation significantly reduces serum cortisol, improves thyroid hormone levels in subclinically hypothyroid patients, increases testosterone in men experiencing age related decline, and measurably improves muscle recovery and strength output in resistance trained adults. Each of these is an independent aging pathway. The fact that a single herb is producing measurable effects across all of them simultaneously is pharmacologically unusual and has driven sustained research interest. The cortisol reduction alone is significant. Cortisol and DHEA move in opposing directions as the body ages, cortisol trending upward, DHEA trending sharply downward. DHEA is a precursor to both testosterone and estrogen, and its decline is closely associated with immune aging, cognitive decline, and loss of muscle mass. Ashwagandha appears to push back against the cortisol side of that ratio in a way that creates downstream hormonal benefits the ancient physicians observed without ever having the language to explain the mechanism. If what you are learning here is shifting how you think about plants and aging, hit subscribe now, because what is coming in the second half of this list goes considerably deeper. Number 6, Gotu kola, the herb that the longest lived people in recorded history refused to stop consuming. This one requires a moment of genuine attention because the history is remarkable and the modern research is even more so. Centella asiatica, known in traditional medicine as Gotu kola, was used in Ayurvedic, traditional Chinese, and Indonesian medicine for purposes that ancient practitioners described consistently across independent traditions as supporting longevity, improving mental clarity, and repairing the connective tissue that holds the body together as age progresses. Elderly practitioners in several Asian traditions consumed it daily their entire adult lives. The active compounds are a family of triterpenoids called asiaticosides and metacasicides, and this is where the research takes a turn that surprises most people who encounter it for the first time. These compounds directly stimulate collagen synthesis, not by providing collagen from outside the body, by activating the fibroblast cells that produce it internally. Collagen is the structural protein that comprises the scaffolding of virtually every tissue in the human body: skin, tendons, cartilage, blood vessels, the gut lining. Its decline with age is not a cosmetic problem. It is a structural one that affects every system simultaneously. Gotu kola extract has been used in clinical wound care specifically because the collagen stimulating effect is measurable and significant. But the anti aging applications go further. Research has shown Gotu kola extract improving cognitive function and reducing anxiety in clinical populations. Studies on vascular integrity have found that Gotu kola strengthens the walls of capillaries and reduces the leakiness that develops in the microvascular system with age. Poor microvascular function is directly connected to cognitive decline, kidney deterioration, and peripheral neuropathy, three of the most consequential conditions of advanced aging. Traditional use included fresh leaves added to salads and drinks daily, decoctions prepared for wound healing and skin repair, and concentrated preparations taken specifically for cognitive support. Number 5, Bacopa. The herb ancient physicians prescribed for one reason and one reason alone. Here is the detail that stops most people when they encounter it for the first time. But in the classical Ayurvedic texts, Bacopa monnieri was not used for sleep. Not for inflammation, not for general vitality. It was classified specifically and almost exclusively as a medhya rasayana, a term that translates as an herb that sharpens the intellect and preserves the mind. Ancient physicians were that precise about what it did. They were not using it broadly. They were using it for the brain, specifically, consistently, and across thousands of years of continuous practice. Modern neuroscience research has now identified why, with a level of mechanistic detail that the ancient practitioners obviously could not have possessed, but whose outcomes they predicted with striking accuracy. Bacopa contains compounds called bacosides, specifically bacoside A and bacoside B. which have demonstrated the ability to enhance the efficiency of nerve signal transmission by repairing damaged neurons and enhancing the synthesis of key proteins involved in synaptic plasticity, the mechanism by which the brain forms and retains new information. Multiple randomized controlled trials have confirmed that Bacopa supplementation over a period of 8 to 12 weeks produces significant improvements in memory formation, processing speed, and attention in both healthy older adults and in populations showing age-related cognitive decline. The effect size is large enough to be clinically meaningful, not a marginal statistical signal, but a functional improvement that participants themselves report noticing. The neuroprotective effects extend beyond cognition. Bacopa has demonstrated the ability to reduce beta amyloid accumulation in laboratory models of neurological aging, one of the primary pathological features researchers study in the context of cognitive deterioration. Ancient physicians prescribed it for the mind. Modern neuroscience is finding out exactly how it protects the mind and why the ancient prescription was right. Traditional use was a daily infusion of the fresh herb, consumed consistently over months and years rather than occasionally. The ancient medical texts were clear on this point. Bacopa requires time. The benefits accumulate. Modern trials confirm that the most significant effects appear after sustained use of 8 weeks or more. Consistency was the prescription. It still is. Number 4, turmeric. The golden root that is forcing pharmaceutical companies to recalibrate their research priorities. Curcuma longa has been used in Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine for over 4,000 years. It was prescribed for joint pain, for digestive inflammation, for liver protection, and for conditions ancient physicians described as internal heat. A category that maps almost precisely onto what modern research calls chronic low-grade systemic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is now recognized as the single most consistent driver of biological aging across virtually every system in the body. The progression of cardiovascular disease, the development of type 2 diabetes, the neurological changes associated with cognitive decline, the cellular environment that enables cancer progression. Every one of these shares chronic inflammation as a foundational contributor. Curcumin, the primary active compound in turmeric, has been shown to inhibit NF-κB, the master inflammatory signaling switch that when chronically activated drives this entire cascade. The research volume on curcumin is now so substantial that pharmaceutical companies have invested enormous resources attempting to develop synthetic versions of it. The problem they keep encountering is that the natural compound appears to operate through multiple pathways simultaneously in a way that makes it difficult to isolate and replicate cleanly. Ancient healers did not know about NF-κB. What they knew was that people who consumed turmeric daily appeared to age differently than those who did not. They built it into the foundation of their cuisine and their medicine. Modern molecular biology is now explaining why that observation was correct. The bioavailability issue is real, and the ancient world solved it through cooking. Combining turmeric with black pepper and a fat source, the way it appears in traditional culinary preparations across South Asia, increases curcumin absorption dramatically. The piperine in black pepper blocks the metabolic pathway that would otherwise eliminate curcumin before it can reach systemic circulation. People figured out that specific combination thousands of years before anyone understood the mechanism. Traditional use was direct and daily. Fresh root grated into preparations. Dried powder incorporated into every cooked meal. Preparations combining turmeric with black pepper and fat specifically for medicinal purposes. The golden root is in your kitchen right now. Treat it accordingly. Number 3, Schisandra, the berry that was kept secret by imperial physicians for reasons that modern aging research is now fully explaining. Schisandra chinensis was used for over 2,000 years in traditional Chinese medicine, with a classification that stands out even among the most revered herbs in that tradition. It was called the 5-flavor fruit because it simultaneously activates all 5 taste receptors: sour, sweet, salty, bitter, and pungent, a property that ancient Chinese physicians interpreted as a sign that the herb worked across all 5 organ systems simultaneously. That was their framework, and the modern research is now telling us that in terms of biological outcome, they were essentially correct. Schisandra was prescribed specifically for longevity. for physical and mental endurance under sustained stress, and for protection of the liver, an organ whose declining efficiency with age has now been recognized as central to systemic aging, because the liver is responsible for processing and eliminating the inflammatory compounds and metabolic waste products that accumulate throughout the body. The active compounds in Schisandra are called schizandrins and gomacins, lignans, with documented hepatoprotective effects. Clinical research has confirmed that Schisandra extract reduces markers of liver inflammation and oxidative stress, improves liver enzyme profiles in populations with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and enhances the organ's detoxification efficiency. For anti-aging purposes, that matters because a liver functioning at reduced capacity means inflammatory byproducts remain in circulation longer, accelerating systemic damage across every other organ. Schisandra also adapts the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the body's central stress response system, in ways that reduce the cortisol burden of chronic stress. Imperial Chinese physicians kept it close to the royal court. They were not protecting a superstition, they were protecting a compound. Number 2, saffron, the spice that ancient physicians traded weight for weight against gold, and that modern gerontologists are now studying with serious attention. Here is the economic fact that establishes the context for everything that follows. For much of recorded history, genuine saffron, the dried stigmas of Crocus sativus, was priced at or above gold by weight in certain markets. Wars were fought over its supply. Trade routes across Persia, India, and the Mediterranean were built specifically to move it. When something commands that price across that many cultures for that many centuries, the explanation is never purely aesthetic. The explanation is value that people experienced directly in their bodies. Saffron was used in ancient Persian, Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Indian medicine for an overlapping set of conditions: mood disorders, cognitive decline, menstrual irregularity, and inflammatory disease. What modern research has found underlying all of those applications is a compound called crocin, along with related carotenoids, safranal, and picrocrocin, with a pharmacological profile that is genuinely unusual among plant compounds. Crocin has been shown to inhibit beta amyloid aggregation in laboratory models of neurological aging, to reduce oxidative damage in neural tissue, and to increase the availability of serotonin and dopamine through a mechanism that partially overlaps with pharmaceutical antidepressants but without the receptor downregulation that causes dependency and withdrawal. A 2019 meta-analysis pooling results from multiple randomized controlled trials concluded that saffron extract produced significant improvements in depression and anxiety symptoms comparable to low-dose pharmaceutical antidepressants. That is not a minor finding. Mood disorders in older adults are not merely psychological conditions. They are associated with elevated cortisol, accelerated cognitive decline, disrupted immune function, and dramatically reduced health span. A compound that addresses mood through neurochemical pathways while simultaneously protecting neural tissue from oxidative aging is addressing multiple aging mechanisms with a single intervention. Ancient physicians traded it at gold prices. They were valuing it correctly. Traditional use included small quantities dissolved in warm liquid, added to ceremonial foods specifically for their restorative properties, and prepared as concentrated medicinal drinks for conditions of mental and physical depletion. A few threads dissolved in warm water or milk daily. The ancient world understood that the dose was small and the effect was real. Number 1, Ashitaba, the herb of long life that grows on a single group of islands, and that modern longevity researchers are calling one of the most significant plant discoveries of the past 2 decades. This one requires the full explanation because most people in the Western world have never encountered it, and the science behind it is the most extraordinary on this entire list. Angelica keisuke koizumi, known in Japan as ashitaba, meaning tomorrow's leaf because of the remarkable speed with which it regenerates after being cut, grows natively on the Izu Islands of Japan. Those islands have historically had some of the highest recorded concentrations of centenarians in the world. Researchers studying longevity patterns in those island communities noticed that ashitaba was consumed daily, consistently, across the lifetimes of the oldest residents. They began investigating why. What they found was a compound called 4'-dimethioxycalcone, a flavonoid found in concentrated form in Ashitaba that no other common food plant contains in meaningful quantities. The finding that followed is the one that stopped the longevity research community. This compound activates autophagy. Specifically, it activates a cellular cleanup process by which cells identify damaged internal components, including deteriorating mitochondria, misfolded proteins, and accumulated cellular debris, and systematically break them down and recycle their components. Autophagy is now recognized as one of the most consequential mechanisms in the biology of aging. When it functions efficiently, damaged cellular components are cleared before they accumulate into dysfunction. When it declines with age, which it does, those damaged components build up and begin disrupting cell function across every tissue simultaneously. The research on 4,4'-dimethioxycalcone was published in Nature Communications in 2019. The finding was that this compound extended lifespan in multiple laboratory organisms, including yeast, worms, flies, and mice, through autophagy activation. The effect was not marginal. The researchers described it as among the most significant autophagy activating compounds identified from a natural food source. The populations consuming it daily on those islands were not doing so because of a laboratory finding. They were doing so because across generations of careful observation, they had watched what happened to people who ate it and what happened to people who did not. They had no word for autophagy. They had something more reliable. They had the results. Traditional use was simple and daily. The fresh young leaves consumed regularly as a vegetable, infused as a tea, incorporated into everyday cooking. The island populations that produced the centenarians were not taking supplements. They were eating the plant. What strikes most people when they look at this entire list is that none of these herbs required a clinical trial to discover. Every effect we have walked through today, the cholinesterase inhibition in rosemary and sage, the cortisol modulation in ashwagandha and holy basil, the collagen activation in gotu kola, the neuroprotection in bacopa, the anti-inflammatory cascade disruption in turmeric, the hepatoprotection in schisandra, the neurochemical support in saffron, the autophagy activation in ashitaba. And all of it was identified through something slower and more reliable than a double-blind trial. It was identified through generations of careful, attentive, multi-generational observation of what happened to human beings who used these plants consistently across a lifetime. Modern science did not discover these effects, it confirmed them. With all its equipment and methodology and statistical rigor, it kept arriving at the same places that healers in India, China, Persia, Greece, and Japan arrived at thousands of years earlier, with nothing but patience and honesty about what they observed. That should reframe how you look at the bottles in your kitchen, the plants in your garden, the herbs growing along the roads you drive past every day without stopping. The gap between what has been validated for longevity and what most people are actually consuming has never been wider. Processed food products, heated oils, refined carbohydrates. None of this is what the longest lived populations in human history were eating. Here is the challenge. Pick 2 herbs from this list, just 2. Source the highest quality version you can find and commit to consistent daily use for 60 days. Not as an experiment, as a restoration of something that was always available to you. Pay attention the way the ancient world paid attention. Then drop a comment below and tell me which one surprised you most when you looked into it. Was it the autophagy activation in the island herb that centenarians ate their entire lives? Was it the saffron that ancient physicians valued at the price of gold and that modern trials are now comparing to pharmaceutical antidepressants? I read every comment on this channel. If you are not subscribed, do it now and turn on the notification bell. Next week, we go even further into what the longest lived populations in human history were actually doing every single day. You do not want to miss it.